For this segment of our pre-meal, virtual pre-meals, I am with Nate Weis from Silver Oak Cellars, which is kind of unique because they have several wineries or locations that they produce from, and we actually stock them in our restaurants. So I want to get a little background on both of those, and we'll talk about the wines that come from each of those spots. But Nate, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Silver Oak and what's going on in Napa?
Will do, Brian. Thanks. So Nate Weis, I'm the Vice President of Wine Growing for Silver Oak and Toomey. Toomey's kind of our cousin brand that makes Pinot Noir and Sauvignon Blanc. And I started with Silver Oak about 6 years ago in 2014. I grew up here in the Napa Valley. My dad was a winemaker, just recently retired. So I grew up around the wine business and it felt very comfortable to me. And so I've been doing this now. I like to say I've never actually held another job. I waited tables in college to pay the bills, but
so is everybody
really qualified to do anything else other than make wine at this point. So Silver Oak, we've been around almost 50 years. We're approaching, this will be our 49th vintage. We're approaching that 50-year mark, which is a long time for the California wine business.
Yeah.
And it was founded on a couple different principles by the Duncan family and Justin Meyer, who was the original winemaker. And they decided that they wanted to make just one wine. They wanted to make Cabernet Sauvignon, which sounds very obvious at this point, but in 1972, that was sort of a radical idea. They wanted to use only American oak, which kind of sounds like a radical idea now in 2020, but in 1972 was actually quite common in this part of the world. And then they wanted to age the wines before they sold them. So they wanted to have a very long extended release cycle, which we still practice today. And so they started out making one wine, a North Coast Cabernet Sauvignon, and we branched out and doubled the number of wines we made in the late 70s to Napa Valley and Alexander Valley. We're actually old enough that we sort of predate the AVA system. So in 72, there was really no distinction between Napa Valley and Alexander Valley. And once the AVA system came around, we followed that and started making two. And we now, as Brian mentioned, we now operate two wineries, one in Alexander Valley, which is in Healdsburg, and then the winery, if you visited us, you probably have come to, which is in Oakville, which is in sort of like ground central heart of the Napa Valley, right smack in the middle. You'll see behind me, we have our water tower. That's kind of our icon for the label. When they originally designed the label, sorry?
I've always kind of wondered, is that an actual water tower or is it a fake Disney type water tower?
We don't use it for its intended purposes anymore. Yeah, they're generally they have like landscaping equipment and landscaping irrigation work, and in Oakville it's the pump for the little pond that we have out in front, the water feature.
But it's kind of an iconic shed.
Yeah, exactly. So back in the old days, they used to have a water tank up high, and you would have your well in the body of the water tower. You'd pump water out of the ground up to the water tank, which would sort of feed your house and give you water pressure. And people that wanted to make them look nice built these nice water towers around it. But now you'll still see them around, but they're mostly mother-in-law units, and people use them the way that we use them at this point.
Right. Well, it's definitely been, all the labels that I've seen over the last 25 years from Silver Oak. Obviously, that label hasn't really changed much, and that water tower is on there, and it's it's definitely that black, white, and silver kind of label is the marker and identity.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable how little the label has changed in all that time. So this is our Alexander Valley label, which still looks pretty much the way it did in 1972.
Yeah,
it's gotten changed a little bit and made a little bit fancier with shinier paper, but besides that, it looks almost identical to
All right. Yeah. So as we talked about a little bit, you have a winery in Alexander Valley. So tell us a little bit about Alexander Valley and why the wine from that region is special and why you guys produce it, and maybe a little bit about the style that you guys produce out of that area.
Yeah, Alexander Valley is one mountain range. It's the coastal range in from the Pacific Ocean, so it's a little bit closer to the coast. It's in northern Sonoma County. Mostly around the town of Healdsburg, but it goes all the way up to the Mendocino County border. And it's kind of as an AVA, it's a long, narrow band, but as a landscape, it's a little bit more spread out and sprawling, a lot of rolling topography. The Russian River is it defines kind of the western edge of Alexander Valley, which is an important part of Sonoma County geography. And really, Sonoma County climate is dictated by the ocean through the Petaluma Gap. So the gap opens up to the Pacific Ocean. The fog rolls in and out every day during the summer. And it kind of makes its way up through the Santa Rosa Plains to Alexander Valley. So there's parts of the valley that are socked in by fog until 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, it really gets up that far.
It does, yeah, yeah. But the valley itself kind of chokes around the town of Asti.
Right.
So anywhere north of that, it's a little bit hotter. And so we have vineyards north of that near Cloverdale that are very early and kind of provide the punch and the power to the wine. And then the most of our estate vineyards are actually in the benchlands of Alexander Valley proper, which is kind of nestled up against the Mayacamas range. And a little bit later in the season, a little bit more acidity, a little bit more structure. And that's what I think Alexander Valley is kind of unique for, is that it really has it kind of is very true to that Cabernet character of a little bit of herbaceousness. It's got a lot more acidity. The structure is a little bit more rustic sometimes because of that influence from the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah. So I've always pictured Alexander Valley, because it is so far inland and kind of north, a little bit warmer, and because you aren't out a little bit farther to the west, where we often were finding, cooler climate grapes like Chard and Pinot. Up in Alexander Valley, you get the Cabernet, you get that nice intensity. So tell us a little bit about what you do. You mentioned American oak a little while ago, but in Alexander Valley specifically with the Cabernet that you guys produce there, what is the oak treatment, and what should we expect from that as it impacts the wine style?
Yeah, so we're dedicated to American oak. We actually operate a cooperage in Higbee, Missouri, a little town in kind of central Missouri. So we make our own barrels, which is very unusual. Certainly, as a winemaker, never thought I'd be involved in the management of a cooperage. I always thought I'd just be buying those barrels.
Right.
But we use about half new barrels every year on the Alexander Valley. And what you find with American oak is there's a distinct signature of vanilla and coconut. So it's a different species than French and European oak. And it has a lot more of the precursors for those sorts of aromatics. And so it's very, very fragrant, I would say, with American oak. And it's very recognizable to the American consumer too, because it's the same oak species that whiskeys are aged in, and cream soda. And so a lot of the same characters that they're used to.
Yeah, you definitely, when you taste, a wine that's done in French oak, whatever the varietal is, it almost doesn't matter. You get next to an American oak wine, you definitely get that sort of creamy coconut kind of flavor, and sometimes a little dill and vanilla spice there, but that sort of sweet element underneath everything, as opposed to French oak, which dominates a little bit more with baking spice and a little bit more high tone kind of flavor. That's what I always kind of picture it as. So yeah, in those Alexander Valley cabs, that definitely complements that dark berry fruit and whatnot. So is it the same process and same aging technique for the Napa Valley Cabernet?
It's slightly different. In Napa Valley, we use a little bit more new oak. The western edge of the Napa Valley is the Mayacamas range, and it's the eastern edge of Alexander Valley. So Napa Valley is one more mountain range inland and a little bit further away from the ocean. So a little bit warmer climate. The blends are a little bit different. Alexander Valley is typically 95% Cabernet Sauvignon. Up until about 10 years ago, it was 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. Every year we changed that in 2011. And have continued to blend a little bit in, but it's really kind of a nuance more than it is a Bordeaux blend. In Napa Valley, the wine since 1994 has been largely blended. So it's 80% Cabernet Sauvignon most years. There's usually 10 to 15% Merlot. And then we grow the other varieties as well. So we use Petit Verdot, Cabernet Franc, some years Malbec, some years not, just kind of depends. And so the blend's a little bit different. And because it's a little bit warmer climate, the wine's a little bit denser, a little bit rounder. It can take more new oak. And so we typically will use about 80% new barrels every year in the Napa Valley.
So a little bit more intensity, obviously, in the Napa Valley, a little bit more new oak, going to add even a little bit richer flavors. So when we talk about food and wine pairing, and staff is looking to maybe make some recommendations to our guests, do you have a particular kind of favorite item or two that you might say works a little bit better with Alexander Valley, and then maybe one or something that might work with the Napa Valley Cabernet?
Our in-house chef, our executive chef, loves the Alexander Valley because it's way more versatile than people think. So he loves to kind of blow people's minds by pairing it with salmon, pairing it with tuna, even vegetable dishes sometimes, something with more umami like eggplant or mushrooms or something like that. And I think the acidity has a lot to do with that, and the bright berry fruit.
Yeah, definitely.
Napa kind of tends to get paired with pretty rich protein. That's definitely your steak. Yeah.
Well, that actually works well for us, because in our group we have 10 restaurants. We have a couple steakhouses. We have actually 2 seafood restaurants, and you know, I kind of scratch my head sometimes, but we do have a lot of people who order up a dozen oysters or 2, and then they get their bottle of Cabernet and they go to town, which is great if they enjoy it. I'm perfectly happy with that. It's not something I would maybe recommend, but yeah, I can see how that Alexander Valley. We actually do sell a good amount in our seafood restaurants of that particular wine, along with things like salmon and tuna, seared tuna and whatnot, as well as maybe a steak and other types of dishes, which is great. We have a variety of your wines, both the Napa and the Alexander, on our lists and in the different restaurants. Maybe just give us a little quick recap, a couple bullet points on each of the last maybe few vintages that we might be seeing in the near future or currently have on the list. So maybe start.
Yeah. So as we sit here right now, the current vintage is 2015. So that was kind of in the midst of the extended crazy drought we had here in California. That was also a season where we had really bad bloom weather. So it was a really, really small crop, and it was quite warm and dry throughout the summer. And so those wines are very, very powerful for those reasons. So they're tightly wound. They've got a lot of structure. They're dense. Even the Alexander Valley is more dense than it typically is in 2015. 2016 was kind of one of those Goldilocks years where everything sort of went right. I mean, it was, as a viticulturist, your best years are the ones you don't remember at all because nothing crazy happened to really stick out in your memory. And 2016 was like that. That was sort of the tail end of the drought. It was really the winter of 2016 that busted that wide open. And we got a ton of rain early in 2017. 2017 was also a pretty memorable vintage for us in a lot of ways, but a lot of that had to do with sort of this really high soil moisture in the spring, which causes us a lot of problems with farming, a lot of challenges to overcome. It's farming's like that. There's always challenges. It's either too wet or too dry. It's never quite just right. And then we got a lot of heat during the summer, a lot of heat spikes. So we had very hot temperatures, very dry, low humidity, which sort of it throws the vines for a bit of a loop. And I think what that really resulted in the wines was that the tannin maturity is a little bit more rustic than most vintages of Silver Oak, and the structure's there. I think that's a good thing for long-term aging.
Yeah,
definitely was a signature of the vintage.
Nice. All right, great. Well, we definitely. I'm a big fan going back a long time of Silver Oak, and I know. When I construct wine lists and whatnot, I like to have it on there because it definitely is a different style, mainly because of the high percentage of Cabernet, but also that American oak use, which is really not something you find too often with wineries in California or other places for the most part, at least to the extent that you guys are using it. So it's nice to put that on there, and obviously with almost 50 years of history, there's really good recognition by guests and consumers alike. So it's a good wine to have, and we really like selling it. So I appreciate you.
It's a really interesting thing in that, people that love Silver Oak and know Silver Oak, they can spot it a mile away. It's a very different flavor profile now compared to the competition, mostly because of that American oak being, it is unusual these days.
Yeah. Well, that all works for us. So I really appreciate you taking some time and giving us some insights into the wines, and I look forward to continuing to sell your cabs. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Cheers.
Thank you very much.